Welcome to a special edition of the Dershow. I don't know if you watched this monumental press conference between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. May have been one of the most important hours in Mideast history. President Trump has decided to think outside the box and to propose ideas that have literally never been thought of before. Look, I've written 8 books on the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Middle East. I've never thought of that. And let me suggest first what he has proposed. And of course, CNN has condemned it and called it ethnic cleansing, and others are attacking it. But let's not do that. Let's think about it. Think, the world seems to be allergic to thinking, to considering. I'm open to ideas, to new ideas. And this is a new idea. By the way, it's based on a historical precedent, which I'll get into in a minute. But it's a remarkable new idea. The idea is that the United States will take over the Gaza Strip. And the people who now live in the Gaza Strip will be given homes in areas that are under the control of their Arab and Muslim brethren. They will not be sent to Siberia or other places. They will have areas to go to. Hopefully, many will do it voluntarily in Jordan, in Egypt, maybe in Lebanon, and in Syria, and the Gaza Strip will be empty of people for a period of time, and then the United States could do what should have been done in Gaza a long time ago. Dig it up. Remember, Gaza is 2 countries. There's one on top of the earth, and there's another one under the ground, the tunnels, the terror tunnels. And what the United States would do would be to destroy all the tunnels, dig up all the tunnels, flatten Gaza. There's not much to flatten. All the houses are basically flattened already. And then rebuild it from scratch and turn it into what it could have been turned into in 2005 when Israel left the Gaza Strip and turned it over to the Palestinian Authority, which could have made it into Singapore on the Mediterranean. I've been in Gaza. I've eaten lunch and dinner in Gaza City and in Khan Yunis. And I've been to the seashore in Gaza. It's beautiful. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea. And there's miles and miles of beautiful seafront land. And what Trump has said, again, I'm not in a position to know whether ultimately it could succeed or couldn't succeed, but let's at least give it a chance. It's a novel, innovative, fresh approach. And then it could be rebuilt largely with money from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And homes could be built overseeing the sea with views of the sea. And every single remnant of Hamas, every single rocket, every single explosive would be eliminated. That would probably take a few years. And Israel would not move in. Israel would not reoccupy the Gaza. Trump has made that very clear. The United States would temporarily take over this hellhole. And you say, oh my God, that's ethnic cleansing. Let me give you a little history. The Second World War was caused in substantial part, not completely, but in substantial part, by the fact that millions of ethnic Germans lived in an area that was disputed between Germany and Czechoslovakia. It was called Sudetenland. And the majority of the Sudeten people were Germans, and the majority of them supported the Nazis. And when the Nazis marched into Czechoslovakia, they made alliances with the Czechoslovakian people from the Sudetenland. And then they, of course, started murdering Jews and Czechs and other people. And in the middle of the war, it became clear that the only way to end this would be to make sure that all the Germans who lived in Sudetenland were forced to leave. And at the end of the war, with the support of Winston Churchill, with the support of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and even with the grudging support of the Soviet Union, every single ethnic German was taken out of Sudetenland. Apparently, some were allowed to stay if they had been anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, but these are people who've been living there for 300 years, much longer than anybody in Gaza had been living. Most of the people from Gaza had roots in Egypt and Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. The Gazan population is not native to Gaza. Some are, but it doesn't go back to forever. It goes back, much of it, to the time when Israel was established, or began to be established with Zionism from the 1890s on. That attracted a lot of Egyptian Arabs and a lot of Syrian Arabs and a lot of Lebanese Arabs to the Gaza Strip, in which they lived for 100 years. Some lived less than that. But the idea that when you attack somebody, the way the Germans attacked the Czechs, you pay a price for it, and your people pay a price for it. And Hamas, of course, represented the people of the Gaza Strip. The vast majority of Gazans voted for Hamas and supported October 7th and participated, many of them, in October 7th. And they've paid a heavy price for it. But in order to assure peace, I want to at least be open to the possibility of President Trump's new way of looking at this, that the people of Gaza have lost their right, whatever rights they may have had, to return and threaten to conduct another October 7th, which is what they threatened to do as recently as just weeks ago. And so what happened after the Second World War, and by the way, it didn't happen only in Sudetenland. There was a city called Königsberg, the home of some of the greatest intellectuals in German history, a town with a very significant number of Jews. Immanuel Kant lived there. I know families who lived there. And when the Russians defeated the Germans at the end of the Second World War, guess what they did? They took every single German out of the city of Königsberg, sent them south into the heartland of Germany, including even as far away as Bavaria, renamed the city from Königsberg to Kaliningrad, and repopulated it 100% with Russians. German was no longer spoken there. German statues were torn down. They were replaced by Russian. This was done with the acceptance of Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and other leaders of the world. Because, and by the way, Königsberg, Kaliningrad is not even attached to Russia. It's not even close to Russia. It's hundreds of miles away from Russia, separated by large areas of land and large areas of sea. Go look at the map. Look at Kaliningrad. Look at Königsberg. Look it up on Wikipedia, or look it up in your encyclopedia, and you'll see this is just what happens after war. It happened after the First World War as well. The Ottoman Empire was completely disassembled, and people were made to move long distances. Look, let's be very clear about one thing. Peace is more important than land. Peace is more important than geography. Peace is more important than people staying where they have been for years. If you could achieve real peace in the Middle East by emptying out the Gaza Strip and rebuilding it, Trump talked about some internationalization. These are all just ideas that are being spitballed and thrown out. But the key point is not returning to the status quo. That's what Trump said over and over and over and over again in his press conference. You cannot repeat the past. As Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If you just allow the current population of Gaza to return to Gaza, they will support Hamas. They will attack Israel again. Israel will attack them again. Israel will win and turn them into rubble. And it will happen again and again and again. So President Trump has introduced some new thinking. Will it work? I don't know. I'm not enough of a geography or ethnicity expert. I am enough of an expert on the Middle East to know that nothing else will work. So I have one question for CNN. When you attack this and condemn it, and the New York Times will condemn it, there'll be an editorial on the front page of the New York Times condemning it. Come up with an alternative. Tell us what you would do. Tell us an idea that's better than that. Maybe you can. If you can, I'll support it. I'm in favor of any idea that will bring peace to the Middle East, allow Israel to continue to thrive as the nation state of the Jewish people, end any occupations of anybody under all circumstances, come to peace treaties, have Israel make peace with the Saudis, have Syria under its new, undemocratic, but new leadership, make some kind of peace with Israel. I have to tell you that there's no one better than Donald Trump to at least come up with out-of-the-box ideas that have a potential for doing this. Remember, Trump in his first term did something that every president promised to do and lied. Every president promised to recognize Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel and move the U.S. embassy there. Trump did it. I was there. Don't tell me he didn't do it. I was at the opening of the embassy, me and my grandson. We were sitting in the front row. We were honored guests. I have a brick from the new building signed by Bibi Netanyahu, and who was there. And so don't tell me it can't be done. People said recognizing Jerusalem couldn't be done. It was done. People said recognizing the Golan Heights would create terrible. It didn't. It was done. Trump has managed to do things by being willing to think outside the box. Look, do I support everything that Donald Trump has done since he was elected? No, I don't. There are some of his appointments that I'm not thrilled about, but I have my priorities. And my priorities are peace in the Middle East. My priorities are restoring the rule of law in America, abolishing lawfare, and Trump. No president in 2 weeks has ever done as much, So I might say I'm with him 70%, not 30. Some might say I'm with him 60%, not 40. Some might say 80. Some might say 90. Some might say 0. You can't really say 0. But you got to give him an E for effort. You got to give him an E for energy. You got to give him an A for action, activity. You got to recognize this is a different president from presidents we've had in the past, Republicans and Democrats alike. This is a bold man who's prepared to take risks, who's prepared to think out of the box, who's prepared to come up with new ideas, and you can challenge them. And I have to think more about it. I'm not sure where I stand on it, but I have to tell you, I've been thinking about Israel since 1948 when I was 10 years old. I don't think I've ever spent an hour thinking more creatively and interestingly about the Middle East than I did in the past hour. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about being able to do this show right on the heels of the end of the press conference. We were supposed to do the show at 5:30. The press conference was supposed to be at 5 o'clock. And then I called my son, Elon, the producer, and I said, can't do it at 5:30. Maybe we'll do it at 6:30. But the conference hadn't started yet. So I said, well, maybe we'll do it at 7:30. And as soon as the conference was over, we got on the air because that's what I wanted to do. I want to think about and have you think about, and maybe even have CNN. I doubt it. Maybe the New York Times. I'm certain they're not. Think about it. They're not going to think about it. They're going to just knee-jerk reaction. Ethnic cleansing, violation of international law. Not a single person on the left is going to mention the Second World War and what happened and how good it was that 3 million ethnic Germans were required to leave Czechoslovakia and move back to Germany. How good that was for world peace. Nobody's going to mention that. Nobody's going to mention that there are precedents after the end of the First World War. They were not so great after the First World War because there wasn't an enduring peace following that. A short period of time between 1920 and 1939. It's just 20 years. There was a Second World War, which was much worse than the First World War, largely because France and England failed to satisfy its obligations under the Versailles Treaty, which required them to prevent Germany from rearming. They permitted Germany to rearm, and the rest is horrible, tragic, genocidal history. But I think we learned a lesson after the Second World War, and we said to the ethnic Germans of Sudetenland, sorry, folks, we know you've lived here 300 years. We know your grandparents and great-grandparents are buried here, but, everybody has to make sacrifices in the interest of peace. And it's not such a great sacrifice to have to move, particularly to have to move from one area under Arab Muslim control to another area 30 miles away, 50 miles away, 100 miles away, under Arab Muslim control. It's a sacrifice. But it's not the greatest crime or international violation of human rights. No, it's about goddamn property. That's all it's about. It's about houses. No, it's about peace. And peace trumps houses. And peace is more important than where you live and bring up your children. What rational person wouldn't rather move 100 miles away and bring up their children in peace than move back to Gaza and have their children killed? Because that's what's going to happen. If the Palestinian people are allowed to move back to Gaza, and if Gaza is allowed to remain under the control of Hamas, they will die. They will die. They will either be killed by Hamas or they'll be killed by Israel because Israel has attacked Hamas. But they will not be able to live in peace. So let's open our minds and open our hearts. Maybe in the end it can't happen. I don't know. I'm not here to give assurances or guarantees that it can happen. I can give you one guarantee, that if we return to the prior status quo, there will be death, destruction, warfare, murder, terrorism. That's 100% certain. Anything is better than that. Let me mention one other thing. President Trump made an unequivocal statement. He looked us all in the eye and he said, Iran will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Not the first person to say that. I sat across from Barack Obama in the Oval Office, and he looked me in the eye and he said Iran would not be able to have a nuclear weapon. But then he signed a deal that would have almost assured them the ability to develop a nuclear weapon surreptitiously. Of course, the deal didn't allow it, but they were doing it. We now know because Israel stole the secrets, the atomic secrets, after the deal was made and discovered that Iran has been lying to everybody. Iran has said over and over again, it's in the deal that they will never try to develop nuclear weapons. It's in the deal itself. The horrible deal that Barack Obama imposed on the world and on Israel. It says in the deal that Iran has committed itself not to develop nuclear weapons. Of course, they had their fingers crossed, their toes crossed, their eyes crossed, and everything else crossed. They were lying. They were using the deal not only to develop nuclear weapons, but to enrich themselves so that they could continue to support Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Islamic Jihad, and every other terrorist group in the Middle East. And President Trump got out of that deal, and I'm glad he did. He did the right thing. I wrote a book called The Case Against the Iran Deal. And as the result of President Obama looking me in the eye and telling me he had Israel's back, and me realizing at the end of his second term that he lied to me, I ended my friendship with Barack Obama. We were friends. He wrote me nice letters. He invited me to everything. He invited me to the White House over and over again. When Shimon Peres was given the Freedom Medal, I think I was my wife and I, the only two people not in the government that were invited. We sat with, former presidents and everybody. Barack Obama. I remember I had a joke with his wife. I said to her, "Thank you for inviting me to this really special event." And she said, "Well, you didn't let me in your class in legal ethics at Harvard Law School. I don't know why I invited you to the White House." And then she smiled and said, "I do know why I invited you to the White House, because you're not only a friend of ours, you're a friend of Shimon Peres." And I was. And I was there as a result of being a friend of both of them. But my friendship with Barack Obama ended when he didn't veto a UN Security Council resolution that called Israel's control of the holiest place in Judaism, the Western Wall, illegally occupied territory, something that he had said he would never do. But he did, because he was mad at Netanyahu. He wanted to get even with Netanyahu, and he behaved in a petty and childish fashion, and took revenge at the end of his term. Look, I can't predict for you today what the next 4 years will be like between Israel and the United States, between Netanyahu and between Trump. These are two very, very strong, very, very determined people, leaders. And they're both leaders of democracies, which means, obviously, Israel is a different kind of democracy where just by a vote of non-confidence or a failure to have a vote of confidence in the Knesset, he loses his prime ministership. That doesn't happen in the United States. We're a much more stable country. You need to be impeached. They've tried twice with Trump. Once I helped prevent it. But when you're dealing with democracies, unlike when you're dealing with tyrannies, even with tyrannies, you can't ever know for sure how long they'll last. Look at Syria. Who could have predicted a year ago that the Assad regime would fall, that Assad would be groveling to the Russians and begging for a place to stay so he won't be killed? Who would have known that? So we can't predict the future. We can't predict what will happen. We can't predict what will happen if the United States tries to implement the idea that was put forward today by President Trump, namely American control. Remember, there was a big issue. Everybody knew you couldn't have Hamas go back and control. People said, well, maybe the Palestinian Authority should do it. Some people said, that's not a bad idea, but the majority of Palestinians don't support the Palestinian Authority. They support Hamas. People said, well, maybe Jordan could do it. No, Jordan said they didn't want to do that. Maybe Egypt, after all. The Gaza Strip really is, in many respects, as much a part of Egypt as it is a part of Israel. During the Camp David discussions between Carter and Israel and Menachem Begin, Israel offered to give the Gaza Strip to Egypt, and Egypt said, "Oh no, we don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want that. They're a problem. We don't want that." So now President Trump has come up with an idea. Let's give it a chance. Let's think about it. Let's have analysis of it. Let's think of the positives and the negatives. If you ask me now to vote on that, I would tell you I'm not prepared to vote on that. I am prepared to vote on the alternative. No, 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 no. You give me an alternative and I'll know how to vote. No, 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 because there is no good alternative. But you ask me to vote positively on this one, I just don't know. I'm just not sure. I want to think about it. There's a expression in Jewish tradition that when you ask somebody something, he shouldn't answer al regel echad, on one leg, while standing on one leg. No, you sit down, you think about it, you consider the alternatives, you consider the downsides, you consider the upsides, you consider whether we can maybe come to some resolution which is close to it, but not exactly that. Let's start that process. We have nothing to lose by thinking outside the box. So thank you, President Trump. Thank you for thinking out the box. It's interesting. I've known Bibi, as you know, for many, many years, more than a half a century. I could see that he was surprised by this idea. He really wasn't ready to say whether he embraced it or not. What he said is and what I would have said if I was in his position. Thank you, Mr. President, for thinking outside the box. Thank you for coming up with fresh new ideas. Now let's think about those ideas. Let's consider them. Let's put them through the process of consideration that all ideas have to be put through. And, I'm hoping that maybe at the end we can agree. Maybe the Saudis will agree and help finance it. The Qataris, maybe Egypt and Jordan will understand that having Americans control the Gaza Strip, and that's the creative new idea. Nobody had thought of it. Could bring stability to an area that has had no stability in my lifetime and no stability for some lifetimes before that. Israel's war of independence started by attacks from, yes, the Gaza Strip. Some of the battles for Israel's survival were fought in the Gaza Strip. When Egypt invaded Israel in 1973, where did they come? To the Gaza Strip. So it's been a source of horrible conflict and probably as many deaths per capita as in any other area of the Middle East. So again, thank you, President Trump, for opening up yourself and us to new ideas. Now let's think about these new ideas. Tomorrow we'll be back on at the usual time. I will have thought about it more. You will have thought about it more. You will send me hundreds of letters telling me what you think about it. I will read some of those letters, and maybe, just maybe, we can take a step toward peace. Wouldn't that be good? See you tomorrow.